I know it's incredibly early. In fact, it's extremely early, but nonetheless, the NFL has finally officially released the upcoming schedule. The Pittsburgh Steelers' schedule is now officially out. So, I'm going to offer a very, very extremely early Steelers prediction on the upcoming season. I'm going to offer the record. I'm going to offer game by game. And I'm even going to tell you what I think the biggest games of the season are going to be. And yes, this may be accurate. This may come off well. I may be right. And if I'm right, I'm going to brag about it. This was so early in advance, and I got it right nonetheless. I know the Steelers so much. That's what I'm going to say. If I'm wrong, I'm going to definitely say this was a very early prediction. I put myself on the line. It was so early, and of course, things are going to happen, and things could be different, and I could be wrong. So that's an extra caveat. So prepare yourself for that, but either way, here is my very, very extremely early Pittsburgh Steelers 2020 prediction on this episode of Mic Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm your host, Mike Asti, and this broadcast is also going to be available on SteelersNow.com, of course. Now, the Steelers season will begin a little different than normal. Okay, the Steelers season will begin on national television as part of the back-to-back Monday Night Football games, the best Monday night of the year, really, because they give you more games. They go back-to-back, and generally speaking, you can't say these games are too awful yet because the season just started. But the Steelers are also going to open up the year against an NFC team. We're used to, in recent years, the Steelers playing the Browns constantly, or of course they travel to New England. At least a division rival or a conference rival, certainly in the AFC. But because of COVID-19, because of the pandemic, because of how training camp is in question, the season maybe is in question, maybe all of this will be a moot point because nothing will happen, and all of this most likely will happen with you, the fans, watching like me. And I won't be at the stadium with my press pass. I won't be in the press box, and you guys won't be in the stands because none of us will be there, and it will just be the players and who really, really needs to be there if anything happens. So because of that, they want to get out the AFC, NFC games. They want to get out those inner games. They want to be able to chop up the season. So it's a little different this year, and the schedule might come across a little different than normal, even though some teams are playing rivals and playing interconference games to open up the year. But nonetheless, the Steelers open up against the New York Giants in the Meadowlands, not in New York, but technically in New Jersey. And honestly, as we start things off, that should be easily a win. Now, of course, the Steelers, you can never guarantee anything, and they certainly do lay eggs from time to time, and they certainly do lose games they shouldn't lose. And often they sometimes lose that first game of the year. That's happened in recent memory. Granted, that happened to the New England Patriots, and usually happens to good teams. That's the benefit here. Yes, it's an NFC game. Yes, it's on the road. Yes, you're not as familiar maybe as you would be with other teams, despite teams changing hands constantly and players moving around. But the New York Giants aren't that good. So this is now the Daniel Jones era. Yet again, Eli Manning now officially gone, and you can go back to past shows to talk about his career and what I think there, because he's certainly a future Hall of Famer, even though I'll give you that he's a bit overrated throughout that career and not too many elite seasons despite those rings. But nonetheless, he'll get there for the numbers in his last name. But he's gone now, so it's the Daniel Jones era. And even if you go back actually to our NFL draft show from 2019, we were very surprised the Steelers drafted Daniel Jones. The Giants drafted Daniel Jones. They reached to get Daniel Jones. Gettleman reached to get Daniel Jones, and many, including our live draft show at the time where we didn't have to go virtual then, were able to be at the Walnut Grill at Robinson there, enjoying our appetizers and beers, that he wasn't a highly touted quarterback. He was a good quarterback. There was a pedigree. There certainly was the Cutcliffe and Manning connection, and maybe that could make some sense there. He's basically Eli Manning Part 2, so it's going to be the same thing in terms of level of play, style of play, who taught him how to play, his mentors, and even his personality. I mean, it's all basically the same. So Daniel Jones now getting his first year as a starter without Eli Manning there. Played last year, obviously, but this now with Eli Manning totally gone. Saquon Barkley, obviously the running back, so he obviously is a stud and carried the load significantly most of last year. But again, and we touched on this on past shows, you don't need an elite running back to win. They've instead built their whole team around an elite running back, so we'll see how long that goes. He's not going to be able to carry them through a season and get them in the playoffs by himself. They did bring in some weapons that weren't there before. We'll see, though. This is a younger team. This is a team that finally is going to try to protect Daniel Jones, bringing in some offensive linemen as well. This is a team that's defense is certainly in question. This is just not a good team. This is a team that maybe is building to something. Who knows? They have reached on Daniel Jones, but he actually kind of put egg in our face last year because he played relatively well as a rookie. So Daniel Jones certainly could be something. It's not out of the question. He played okay last year, but there's not tons around him. The team isn't there defensively, and they're not that good. They're not a contender this year, maybe in a couple years. So that should be a victory for the Steelers, a veteran team still, despite some youth now being there. The defense alone could create some turnovers. You could see maybe a fumble for a touchdown, interception for a touchdown, Minka, TJ all getting involved like they were last year in terms of creating turnovers. Ben will have his first start in, over a year at that point, or about a year at that point. So we'll see what happens in terms of how well Ben plays right away. He might have to shake some rust off, but that's a great opponent to shake that rust off because, again, the Giants aren't good. The defense isn't good. You're going to be able to move the ball some. You have more weapons there now, even though there's obviously question marks around what Juju will do now, looking for a comeback season. Will James Conner have a comeback year? Will the running game be better than last year? Can they get the receivers to finally fall in line and get a true depth chart at receiver that's consistent? All those question marks are there around the offense, and Ben certainly is one of them, being a guy who's coming off an injury and getting older and coming off his last full season as a starter 2 years ago where he did turn the ball over more than you would like. But as long as they take care of the football, even if you have to shake some rust off and maybe you rein in the team a little bit in that Week 1 game, the Giants will make more mistakes, Daniel Jones will make mistakes, and that Steelers defense will capitalize and will get the victory. So the Steelers are going to start off 1-0. That's going to be my prediction right there. They will start off 1-0 after that Week 1 game at the Meadowlands, Monday Night Football against the New York Giants to kick things off. And that, of course, is September 14th, 7:15, Monday Night Football. Get excited. We're very, very far away, but nonetheless, the schedule is out, and the season isn't as far as you would think, even though we got a whole training camp to go, and hopefully we can have it. September 20th, though, Sunday, that's 1 p.m. That's going to be Denver. They're getting back into the AFC. They're getting back into the regular schedule, getting back off national TV as they're going to have a string of those 1 p.m. games that you'll see there. And you can find that full schedule as well as our analysis over there, of course, SteelersNow.com. But Denver, another team that they added some weapons, finally. They actually drafted a receiver for the first time in a long time. I just don't think much of the quarterback that they have right now. They built around him very, very well, even adding some defensive pieces. That's not as horrible of a team as, say, the Giants. I think they're further ahead in their trek of trying to rebuild and get back to glory. It may depend on whether or not they have a quarterback that's worth anything, but he has plenty around him and has more around him than Daniel Jones does. There's an argument there, maybe needing more on the running game. I don't think Denver's that good either, though. This is a home game. And again, I'm going to say the Steelers win this one. I know 2-0 is kind of odd for the Steelers, and not to say they're not going to be a good team and not going to make a run at the playoffs, because, and maybe that'll foreshadow, that I'm a little more optimistic about this season than some would have thought, or that I was even a year ago. But I will say that last year and the year before, with all the drama, they would have been a postseason team with this current format. This current format is in existence now, so a seventh team will get into the postseason. If they had last year's record, if it was last year's situation, they would have got in. It's very possible they make a run this year, but we'll see how this schedule rolls. So I have them 2-0 against Denver. I have another victory there to open up the year for the Steelers. And then it's home again, another 7 days, another 1 p.m. game, just standard run of the mill. This is AFC again, the Houston Texans. Now, I'm not going to get too crazy here and feel like the Steelers are going to make some 7-0, 8-0 run and run away with anything. It's going to be a very tough AFC North, maybe one of the better divisions in football, with how freaking good Baltimore is. And I said this, if you look at any of those draft shows back throughout the channel there on Pittsburgh Sports Live for Steelers Now. The Ravens won the draft. They did everything they had to do. They filled every single need. They got value pieces all over, and they're even more dangerous than before. The Bengals are building around Joe Burrow. They're a little bit better. The Browns, I think, actually are better. They had an okay draft, so it's going to be a tough division. Steelers won't have to worry about a divisional game, though, until the 18th of October on a regular one-of-the-mill 1 p.m. game against the Browns and then Baltimore. So then it gets into the nitty-gritty of the divisional schedule, and that'll be a nice little Myles Garrett showdown, his first game against the Steelers since that suspension, obviously, in that incident with Mason Rudolph. Granted, you would assume Mason Rudolph won't be the starter for that game for Pittsburgh, and that's barring, obviously, Ben getting hurt prior to that. And whether you like it or not, Mason Rudolph's going to be the backup this year. They're not going to go get anybody. They didn't go get Winston, although you will see him this year against the Steelers. But I'm going to say this is going to be a loss. This will be the first loss there against the Texans on the 27th. Houston's really, really good, and I understand Hopkins is gone. I understand they're not as prolific as they were in past years. But Watson could steal a game. He still has that ability. This isn't a team I'm going to predict to go win a championship or anything like that. They certainly are worse than last year. This will be brother versus brother, or actually brother versus brothers, with J.J. Watt of the Texans against Derek Watt and T.J. of the Steelers. And no, guys, JJ's not going to be on Pittsburgh during that game against what would then be his former team. He'll be on the Texans. Hopefully he'll be healthy because he's a Hall of Famer, a stud, one of the best defensive players ever, and it kind of sucks that he gets hurt a lot towards the end of seasons. Hopefully he can be healthy in that game. Hopefully he can ball out. I think he will have a big game to try to show his little brother who's really the best of the bunch. He is the guy who's going to the Hall of Fame already, as the other two are building their careers, even though TJ might be headed in that trajectory. So I'm just going to figure the Steelers have to lose at some point. Those first two games kind of seemed easy. And by the way, if I had to pick between the Giants and Denver, one of those that they will lose to open up the year, it's much more likely they lose to Denver even at home than the Giants. There's no way you can be losing that New York team to open up the season, even though it is on the road. So I'm going to say that Houston game's a loss. So if you're following along here at home, it's Steelers now 2-1. I'm going to say they lose for the first time on Sunday, 27th of September against Houston. Tennessee right after. I get what happened last year. I get the playoff run last year. I get they were the AFC representative, or one of the AFC representatives in the conference championship game. I get they won the division. I get they had that better season than a lot of other teams that you would have thought would have been better than last year. I get Ryan Tannehill had an okay ride, and I get he got all that money. But personally, I don't think much of Ryan Tannehill. He's mostly a game manager. He didn't have to throw tons of yards in those playoff games, and they mostly won because Derrick Henry ran through everybody, which is why I say the Ravens drafted Queen at linebacker to kind of stop Derrick Henry from slicing everyone. And as I brought up with Saquon Barkley in New York, that building a team around an elite running back when you don't need an elite running back to win. We've seen that example of the Patriots' recent run. We've seen the Eagles. We've seen other teams, even the Rams, when they went to the Super Bowl. That was with C.J. Anderson as the best playoff running back. Todd Gurley, who's now gone, was injured. So you don't need an elite running back to win, and building a team around an elite running back just isn't financially smart and isn't really the new age football. But they did win last year, and I'm not going to say they're going to be horrible. It's a wide-open division again that they certainly could win, if not. I probably would predict Indy to do it, actually, with Philip Rivers and company, but they're certainly going to be right in there. But I'm going to say Tannehill's going to make some mistakes. I don't think much of the Titans, honestly, at least not as a championship contender, even if they make another playoff run. I didn't think they were going to do anything in the AFC, despite what they ended up doing, and clearly the Chiefs proving to be the best team in the conference by far, despite what Tennessee was able to do with the win over Baltimore and then getting that deep run in the postseason. So I'm going to say that's a victory for the Steelers. I know it is on the road, but home and road hasn't really meant much for the Steelers or really any NFL team the last few years. So I'm going to say that's a win at Tennessee, even though that certainly could be a swing game. That would make the Steelers 3-1, and certainly a solid start for a team that didn't make the playoffs the last 2 years, even though now there's an extra playoff spot that will be available. And by the way, while I'm doing this and you're following along to my very, very extremely early Steelers prediction of what this record will be off this schedule that was just released yesterday as I record this, and we're here towards the beginning of May right now, if you watch this later to know how early this is. There's a poll over there, SteelersNow.com. Feel free to head over there, put your own record in, fill out the poll, answer the questions. We give you different options. What do you think the Steelers are going to do? A lot of these games could be swing games. A lot of these games are going to be big and cool. I think that Tennessee game is going to be a big game earlier in the year, to be honest. That might be the first big game the Steelers have this season, and that is, I believe, Week 4. Yeah, so I think that's going to be the big early game, be the biggest early game the Steelers have, and that's a swing game. But I'm going to go Pittsburgh. The next week, again, another 1 p.m.er. So after that Monday Night Football game to start the year, 7 p.m., 7:15 p.m. against the Giants, and that back-to-back Monday night to open up the year, the Steelers don't get on national TV for a while. In fact, they don't get on national TV again in a primetime game until Thursday, November 26th, and they do have a Fox game against the Cowboys with that historic rivalry that I believe is going to get some primetime coverage. But in terms of primetime on an actual night where they're the only game in town and there's no other competition, they don't do that again after Monday Night Football until the 26th of November against the Ravens, and that gets into their second matchup with Baltimore, actually. So they're already, having played Baltimore, and already into the division at that point. And that's, hopefully we can play this full schedule the way it is, depending on what's going on, if the pandemic rages up again or we get more stay-at-home orders. Regardless, though, the Steelers, if they didn't lose to Tennessee, if they didn't lose to Houston, and I do have them losing to Tennessee and losing to Houston and beating Tennessee, and that could be flip-flopped, but the Steelers aren't going to run through the season 4-5-0. At some point, they're going to lose some games. You got to pick where they're going to lose. I'm going to say the victory will happen over Denver. The victory will happen over New York the week before to open up the season. They will lose to Houston somehow, despite Bill O'Brien being there kind of a buffoon and Hopkins being gone. Watson will do enough. They will beat Tennessee. And I'm going to say right now that they will lose to the Eagles. So I'm going to have Philadelphia as a loss here. It's an out-of-conference game. It's not a gigantic deal if they would lose that game. But I'm going to say they lose to Philadelphia on the 11th of October. That's after the Tennessee game. So that now, if you're keeping track at home, would bring the Steelers to 1-2, 2-1, 3-1, 3-2. That would bring them to 3-2 as they go into October 18th against the Browns. This will be the first divisional game of the season. And we all know what happened last year, and you can watch back through the channel in terms of my take, either instantly or as things went on, in terms of the Myles Garrett incident and the connection with Mason Rudolph and that whole, how racism was brought up and that whole scandal. And again, and I can quickly reiterate here, if Mason Rudolph said something, there's no way Mike Tomlin would be defending him as vigorous as he is, or at least he doesn't believe he said something. It's much more believable to me Myles Garrett is using that as an excuse and hiding behind that when there's nothing to corroborate it. There's no sound that shows that. There's nothing said there. And even if he feels he's racist in his heart, he'd have to be a complete idiot to say a racial slur amongst his own teammates as well, who are right there on the field. The way Pouncey reacted, I don't buy it. But again, hopefully he's not the quarterback in that game, so it won't matter. Steelers on the 18th of October against the Browns. And I'm going to say that's a victory. They usually beat the Browns. I get what happened last year. Again, the Browns are a better team. I don't know if they're going to win both games this year. They're not going to run through the table. I'm not necessarily saying the Steelers are going to win the division. I've kind of let the cat slip out of the bag there. I do believe that to be Baltimore. But the Steelers are still better than the Browns. As long as Ben plays at least to 2 years ago's level, and I know there was a lot of mistakes made there, but as long as he gives you 2 years ago's level, and ideally maybe more efficient, less yards, less TDs, but less mistakes, kind of giving you that year that he was normally accustomed to and what you didn't want, or at least what I didn't want out of Jameis Winston if he would have became a Steeler. That's why I didn't want Winston. Yes, the yards and TDs can be there, but he makes too many mistakes with all those interceptions and fumbles. That's kind of where Ben was a couple years ago, granted not to the level of Jameis Winston by any means. I think he's going to be more efficient. And as long as he is, I think they get through that game. The Steelers still have more weapons. On paper, this is a better Steelers team than the Browns, even though the Browns, again, are mightily better, and I think had a solid draft. So I'm going to say that's a victory for the Steelers, and they have to win that because it is going to get harder in terms of that schedule as we move along. So the Steelers beat the Browns. That will put the Steelers to, I believe, 3-3 now. And I wasn't a math major here, folks. So following along on the counting, this is going to make it a bit rough for me. I can eventually go back and just count the losses and then get the record for you. But I believe 3-3. They're going to beat the Browns, in my estimation, and then lose at Baltimore. Baltimore, to me, is the class of the division. They're one of the classes of the conference, if not the best team in the conference, maybe even the best team in football. And my only concern is not this year, but it's for the long term and whether Lamar Jackson and that style can hold up for the next decade or so. But the reigning MVP, I'm assuming, is going to get it done for at least next year, and they got it all over the board. They got it on running back. They got now multiple receivers on both sides of the ball. They can do curl routes. They can go big deep and take the top off with Hollywood Brown and company. They can defensively wear you down like always, and Queen, I think, is a big pickup there in terms of the draft. He's going to stop running backs from slicing them up like happened against Derrick Henry. So I'm going to say that's a loss for the Steelers. This would then move them to, I believe that would put them under 500 then. Maybe I'm totally off, actually. I don't. Wait. So the victory over the Giants, victory over the Broncos, loss to Houston. This is 2-1. Then Tennessee, that's 3-1, 3-2, 4-2, and then 4-3. Yes, there you go. So I went back for you. 4-3 after the 25th of October against the Ravens. That's where I have the Steelers right now. This is still pretty good, folks. You can't be too mad about this. And if they lose one game and don't win another, and maybe these wins and losses will be different, but I think that's a reasonable record at that point. Then there's the bye week, November 1. So you're getting towards the middle of the season, and they have an exact bye week towards the middle, which is a good bye week you generally want to have. At Dallas, this is the next time they're on quasi-prime time, even though they're not the only game in town at the 4:25 slot on Fox against the Cowboys. That's a good Cowboys team, folks. That really, really is a good Cowboys team. And I get they always screw things up and they don't have deep playoff runs and they haven't had a deep playoff run in 25 years. And I get this isn't your older brother's or father's Cowboys team and the whole drama with Dak Prescott and company. And you'd figure Andy Dalton wouldn't be playing at that point if Dak's playing well, but he is there as a not bad security blanket. It's better than what Pittsburgh has in terms of a veteran. And they got weapons across the board. It was Ezekiel Elliott and Amari Cooper and all those studs that are still there, and defensively too. That's on the road. That's in Dallas. I'm going to give that to the Cowboys. I'm going to give that victory to Dallas, and this would move them to 4-4. Steelers then luckily have a little easier slide there before the next divisional game. Quickly, they're going to beat the Bengals. I like the Joe Burrow pick. I like the future there. There is talent around him, but the Bengals just aren't ready yet. They're not as good as the Steelers. They don't have the veteran presence. He's going to make mistakes. He's going to get eaten alive probably against the Steelers defense. It does not mean Joe Burrow will suck for the next 10 years, but it means the Steelers defense is one of the best in football. They were one of the best in football last year in terms of takeaways. He's a rookie, and that's a bad team, or at least not as good as the Steelers. So they're going to lose to the Cowboys, but then beat the Bengals. This would 4-4, 5-4 Jacksonville. They're going to beat Jacksonville as well. Again, Jacksonville not that good, but you'll be able to see Leonard Fournette up close and personal, who I said the Steelers should have added instead of drafting a running back. And again, you can go back through past shows there on Steelers Now and Pittsburgh Sports Live to find my takes there. That's going to be a win, though. There's nothing else going on besides Leonard Fournette. They're just not ready yet. So that would move the Steelers to 6-4. At the Ravens, or not at the Ravens, at home against the Ravens. This is the second Ravens game, and I'm going to assume they're going to split. They just got to split, but they're going to lose one of those two. They're definitely going to lose one of the two. I figured they lose on the road. That is a game, Monday Night Football, 8:25, the Steelers get up for those big Monday night games. It's going to be the team no sleep night for me trying to cover it, I'm sure, with the Monday night games are the hardest on the media. But at home, I'm going to give it to the Steelers despite how highly touted the Ravens are and how much I think of them, and just scroll back about 6 minutes and you'll find out how I think the Ravens are the winners of the division, if not the winners of the conference. But that'll make the Steelers 7-4 at Buffalo, and that's going to be hard. We all know how tough that was even last year. The Bills are very good. I think the Bills right now are the class of the AFC East with Brady out of New England and them kind of influx at quarterback. The Dolphins just have nothing around Tua, despite finally liking a young quarterback being there, but they're far away from winning. That should be, the Jets aren't there yet either, even though they finally got some weapons with Mims around Sam Darnold. That should be the Bills' division to lose, for sure. And if they don't get a division title in the next few years at some point, then they might be cursed like they kind of are thought to be honest. So at Buffalo, I'm going to say that's a Bills victory. I'm going to say that's a Buffalo win. Oh, I'm sorry. Before that, you have the game against the Redskins, the Steelers will get a victory. The Redskins had an okay draft, but they're a younger team, and they're not yet there despite Ron Rivera being the head coach. So at that point, 7-4, 8-4 going into the Bills game, then 8-5 losing to the Bills. They beat the Bengals there. That's 9-5 against the Colts. That's a close game. They had that close game against Brian Hoyer and the Colts last year, and now Phillip Rivers and company is better. But Phillip Rivers always gets eaten up by the Steelers. He's going to make those mistakes. T.J. Watt, Minka again. Joe Hayden maybe get involved there. They're going to get interceptions. They're going to get turnovers, and they're going to beat the Colts, even though I do think that Colts team might win the AFC South and be better with Phillip Rivers. I like Phillip Rivers. I think he's underrated, but he just makes way too many mistakes against a defense like the Steelers, at least in recent memory. So that moves things to 10 wins for the Steelers. That's 10-5. Then I'm going to say there's a loss against Cleveland. Honestly, it's a better Browns team. I'm going to say they split it. We'll give Cleveland the game. They're on the road, and that would move the Steelers to 10-6. So I think if my math is correct, I have the Steelers at 10-6. I could very easily see the Steelers be 9-7. I could very easily see the Steelers be 11-5. I certainly could. It would not shock me. The Steelers could be all different kinds of records in terms of anywhere from 8-8 to 12-4, and I wouldn't be flabbergasted. But I'm going to go down with picking the Steelers here in this extremely early prediction here, early May, right after the schedule gets announced. I'm going to say the Steelers go 10-6 next season in 2020, and I'm going to say that 10-6 certainly gets you into the postseason. I do think the Ravens will be better. I do think the Ravens maybe could even win both of those two games instead of splitting. I do think the Ravens will be one of the top 2 seeds in the AFC, probably maybe only behind the Chiefs, which will suck for them because the top 2 teams in the league, in the NFL, are in the AFC right now, and maybe throw in the Niners, but I do think the Ravens and Chiefs are the best 2 teams in football. They had the best drafts in football. They were very, very good last year and are coming back even better. I think the Ravens are going to be hungry from that playoff loss last year to Tennessee, that upset. They're better suited for all different types of games. They have the talent. They have the experience now. They have a championship-laden head coach. They have an MVP quarterback. This could be the Ravens' year. And I'm going to say they're going to win the AFC North with probably a 12-4 record. I don't know. I didn't look at their schedule, but I think they're going to comfortably win the division with at least a game or 2 hand over the Steelers, and those divisional games will be a big deal. The Steelers will probably have to beat them twice to win that division. And I also can tell you that while this schedule doesn't seem too brutal for the Steelers, it does seem like a relatively winnable schedule. It could be a favorable schedule to Pittsburgh. It's not murderer's row by any means for a team, but they are a team that just missed the playoffs. The Ravens' schedule's not that tough either. The Ravens' schedule's relatively easy too, and they did win that division, so we'll see. I mean, you can argue whether that's fair all day, but their schedule's not that tougher. They're a much better team, and they were a better team last year. So those games are going to be a big deal. These divisional games will be a big deal, obviously. But I'm going to go with the Steelers being 10-6, making the playoffs as a wild card. Who knows, 3rd, 4th seed, whatever. I got to look at the whole picture to say that, but they're going to be 10-6, make a wild card. I think the Ravens win the division. They're certainly better. And in terms of big games, the Steelers don't really have one until maybe Tennessee on the 4th of October. You maybe could say Houston the week before. I think Philly will be a big game. That'll be a big game just because the Eagles will be a little bit better, and it's Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, sure. That first game against the Ravens at Baltimore on the 25th of October, obviously a big game. That's 2 of the best teams in the division. And then you have the Browns the week before with that game with Myles Garrett get maybe his revenge against Pittsburgh. That's obviously a big one too, and the Browns are certainly going to be in playoff contention with another seed available, even though I don't think they're better than Pittsburgh. The Cowboys is always a big game because of the history, but both teams are really, really good this year. I certainly can say that. They don't really have another big game again until the Ravens over there on the 26th of November. That's Monday Night Football. Or, I'm sorry, that's Thursday Night Football. Against the Ravens, and I'll still be Team No Sleep there, even though it's a Thursday night. And then the game against Buffalo is probably the next biggest game. That's the 13th of December. That is the next biggest game for the Steelers against the Bills, who should be the class of their division and should be a pretty good Bills team that certainly is on the right track finally for that franchise. And then after that, there's not that many big games. Maybe playing Phillip Rivers, maybe the Browns again. The Bengals aren't going to be a big game, even though I think they drafted well. So we'll see. Again, I'm going with the Steelers 10-6. I do think they're going to make the playoffs. I do think they're going to be more secure and have a better year than they've had the last 2 years. Although, remember, if they go 9-7, if they go 8-8, there's a 7th postseason spot right now. That probably will still be good enough to get you into the postseason. The conference is not incredibly deep, even though their division is kind of deep. So I'm going to say the Steelers do enough to get to 10-6. That's how I did with the schedule. I'm going to say they go 10-6. I'm going to say they don't win the division. The Ravens do, but they end up as a wild card, and we'll get into the postseason, and then we'll see what happens after that based on the landscape and who's in that postseason with them. I think Ben will have a solid year. Maybe not the yards, maybe not the TDs of 2 years ago, but a little bit more efficient football. I think he'll be better than what you had last year, certainly in Rudolph and Duck. He'll get through most of the year. He may have a start or two that he misses, which maybe will change how this schedule goes and the wins and losses. And if Rudolph has to play, Rudolph did go 5-3 last year. He did play okay. Yes, he kind of sucked after that Garrett incident or even the incident against the Ravens. No, I don't think he's necessarily the future of the Steelers. And yes, I'd rather have an actual veteran backup. But it's not the end of the world if Rudolph only has to play 2 or 3 games. If he has to play the entire season or most of the season like last year, then it's a problem. But I'm going to bank on Ben being healthy. I'm going to bank on Connor having a better chance at a comeback year than, say, Juju, because that gets into conversation for another day on Juju's contract, but he's not yet proved he can do it as a number one without that double coverage coming at him and without somebody else taking that double coverage. So we'll see what happens. A lot of pressure on Juju, a lot of pressure on James Conner, 2 of the most pressure-filled NFL players coming into next season at all. And when you look at the schedule, no matter all the drama, no matter what's going on, no matter how those guys do, it's not that hard of a schedule. I do think the Steelers go 10-6 and will get into the postseason, even though the Ravens win the division. So that was my very, very extremely early Steelers prediction, with a little bit of analysis there, and I kind of maybe previewed on some comments and some commentary about different players and what we'll talk about here in coming weeks as we get towards more of the off-season coverage here at Steelers Now on Pittsburgh Sports Live, and all of that also is kind of a lot of that's already on the channel there throughout our draft shows and everything else we have going on the website and over there at Pittsburgh Sports Live. So make sure you follow us all throughout social, Pittsburgh Sports Live on Twitter, at PGH Sports Live on Twitter. There's the nameplate there, at PGH Sports Live on Twitter, Pittsburgh Sports Live on Facebook, at PGH Steelers Now on Twitter, as well as Steelers Now on Facebook. And you can, of course, find me at Mike Asti 11 on Twitter, as you see there below. Throw a comment down below this video. Tell me what you think the Steelers record's going to be. And if you don't want to do it here, go over there to SteelersNow.com and answer our poll question and put it over there. Or find me on Twitter and go tell me there. But again, while you're down there, if you're going to comment, that's my favorite graphic. Not only because how cool it is as it slides in there and appears on the screen like that, but just because it's part of the network and helps us pay the bills even here in home studios. Click on the subscribe button. Make it easier for us to get the content to you. If you don't want to follow us anywhere on the sites or on social media, then you can just click subscribe and you'll get a notification on YouTube when videos like this go up, and it'll help us pay the bills here at the Now Network with all the sponsors and everybody else trying to keep this moving in the midst of a global pandemic. So we're doing our best right now. But again, I do think the Steelers go 10-6 on the early prediction of that schedule. I do think they make the playoffs. They would have the last 2 years with an extra seed, and I do think they finally take advantage and play better football than they have, more as a team than only one side of the ball being great like it's kind of been the last several years. But with all that said, the Ravens are the class, and I do think Baltimore wins the AFC North with one of the 2 best records in all of football, certainly in the AFC.